Welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Our guest is President of the University of Houston Downtown, President Juan Muñoz. Dr. Muñoz, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, first question, leadership-wise. When you write the Muñoz leadership story, what are some of the chapters going to be about? What are you thinking when you think about leadership?
The first thing I'm thinking is who would buy the book?
Maybe your mom, maybe your wife, kids.
Okay. Well, my mom certainly would.
If you're still employed, your vice presidents,
That's good. That's good. I think the first chapter would probably be preparation. Another chapter I think would be anticipation. I think another chapter would be execution. Another chapter would be on transparency. I think that there are very few things more important than communication and leadership. And I think I'd have a chapter on fallibility. I think leaders fail, and they have to accept it, own up to it, and correct it. And they need to be public about their failures too, because this illusion of sort of perfection and always getting it right is precisely that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We err, we make mistakes, we're human, we're fallible, and that's why you compliment yourself with the talents of others to minimize the impact when you do err in your judgment. And we make, in these roles, a lot of decisions every single day that have consequences. And so I think those are chapters that might be worthwhile. And then there should always be a chapter in my book and anybody's book about what you do in sort of continuous quality improvement. What do you do to continue to sort of improve your judgment, your optics, your intuition, and in the end, we have a short window. I think any person of any position of influence has a small window in which they're able to sort of exercise that influence, and then somebody else enters that window.
Right.
And so.
That's such an important thing to remember, isn't it?
It is. I worked under a provost who wrote a book called "Where You Sit Is Where You Stand." Where you sit as a provost, and the decisions you make, and the memos you type, and the signatures you sort of affix to documents. Where you sit represents what you stand for. Mm-hmm. And so I think being cognizant of that throughout the course of your short sort of period role in these positions, I think is important. I guess the chapter would be called humility.
Yeah, you mentioned one chapter, anticipation. Talk a little bit about that in
terms
of leadership.
I think having when you I believe in the importance of sort of thinking things out and thinking about what could happen, and not a morbid sort of anticipation of always looking at the downside of things, but there's some value to anticipate what could go wrong and what could go right, and what's the value of it.
So it's beyond a roadmap for the future. It's
no,
sort of
Right. I think it's an instinct. It's a reflex. What do you think can happen? How can it go right? What would we have to do in order to make it go right? What are the levers? What are the triggers? What are the obstacles? What are the opportunities? And I think it's a healthy exercise for people in these kinds of roles. I served under a chancellor. He was a former congressman. He was a former railroad commission. He was a state senator. And he also believed in the importance of anticipation. See it coming. And I think my background, where I grew up, it was also a very important habit for survival. Mm-hmm. See it coming. See the guy driving down the street fast. Mm-hmm. Okay. You're walking on the wrong side of the street, and there's a whole bunch of other guys on the other side of the street, and you're not particularly familiar with that street in particular. Anticipate. Yeah. If I got to start running.
Well, let's use that as a segue. Let's talk about your background. You grew up in LA.
Right.
And talk about your childhood, because as a first-generation kid, I'm not sure people would have expected that you'd end up being the president of a university.
No, I'm certain that they wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I could give you the exact names.
You
of people.
probably weren't even sure, right?
No. I was often the bane of my teachers' existence. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up specifically in East Los Angeles, and it's a rather large geographic area. It's very populated now, but it was even when I was growing up. Yeah. And there are different sections, and they have different sort of names. I grew up in an area particularly called Boyle Heights, but there are other areas that have identities associated with the church, the Catholic Church, like Resurrection, and etc. Assumption, and so you would say, well, I grew up over there by Resurrection, by Assumption, by Our Lady of what have you, by City Terrace, and so you associate yourself with a certain part of the broader area. So growing up, I had a great time. I look back and I loved my childhood. It was exciting. It was very autonomous. I mean, I think about now, my kid can't go 1 block without me sort of hovering.
Right.
And I was out of my house 8 a.m. and
Yeah.
I got back 8 p.m.
Yeah.
and there was no cell phones. And I don't know what my parents were thinking,
Yeah.
but we got home every night pretty much. And so it really cultivated a lot of independence, a lot of creativity, a lot of ingenuity, a lot of anticipation.
Wow.
And so I enjoyed it, and it was dangerous. I grew up in a very dangerous time in Los Angeles. You know,
But as a kid, we seem to be oblivious to any danger around us.
right.
aren't we?
And
Yeah.
I didn't leave where I grew up. I didn't leave my neighborhood very often. I have a funny story I told my son just the other day about I played football in high school, and there had been some coach. It was actually the school was Prairie View A&M.
Ah.
And my head coach said, "Hey, we got some inquiries about you from Prairie View A&M." And so this is exactly the conversation. And so I said to him, "Well, where is it?" And he said, "Well, it's in Texas." And I go, "Okay, well, where's that? You know, like where?" And he goes, "Like outside of Houston." I go, "Well, where is that?" He goes, "Well, it's in Texas." I go, "Okay." And I go, "Well, how far is it?" And he goes, "Well, it's pretty far." And so here, I mean, this is just, you know,
Yeah.
my mindset
Sure.
at 17, 18. And so back then, if you were poor, you could get a bus pass around the city, okay, at a discounted rate because you were economically disadvantaged. So that's how I went to school, on the bus. You had a bus pass. You showed the bus pass, they took you. All right. So I said, and it was just for within the city limits. So I said, "Well, can I get there with this bus pass?"
You told your son this.
I told my coach that.
Yeah.
Bro, but I was telling my son the story.
Yeah.
It's he doesn't. My son is oblivious to what a
Right.
bus pass would be or the inside of a bus.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I said to my coach, "Can I get there with this bus pass?" It said LA Metro or something, and he goes, just like you, he goes, "No, it's in another state." I go, "Well, if I can't get there with this bus pass, it's too far from."
That's your world. Your world was the Metro bus pass.
I said just like this. I said, "Coach Stark, if I can't get there with this bus pass, it's too far from my mother,
Yeah.
so I can't go."
So as you got through high school and you're on the football team, and how did you decide to go to college? Because for so many first generation college students, and I was one as well, sometimes you don't get all the support that you need, certainly from family to go. But what was it that happened for you then, Juan?
It was a teacher, an English teacher named David Boyer. When I started high school, my brother gave me 2 pieces of advice. I won't share the one, but I will share the second piece. And that was, he said, the only one that you know you should listen to is David Boyer.
Ah.
And so my brother had gone to the same high school, and he just felt that this particular English teacher was very authentic, very caring, very thoughtful, very sincere. And so I'd always enjoyed literature. I'd always enjoyed reading. I'd always enjoyed writing. And so
You were a pretty good student.
I was a reasonably competent student that exerted modest effort.
And you were intellectually curious.
I'd like to believe I was.
Yeah.
And so I think he saw something in me, and I enjoyed his class, and he could see that I enjoyed the literature and that I enjoyed being curious. And he had attended this one university, the University of California in Santa Barbara, and he had attended in the 60s. And he had said, we had a lot of things were happening on that campus. So I only applied to one university.
Really? And it's a relatively selective school.
It is now. In fact, it has about 6 or 7 Nobel laureates,
Yeah.
the most of any university. It's a very selective school. It's one of the 64 AAU institutions.
Yeah.
And so back then, this was the 80s. There were a lot of opportunities for somewhat promising, low-income, disadvantaged students of color. And so the fact that he recommended it meant something to me. And so I only applied to one school. And if I hadn't have gotten accepted to the University of California, Santa Barbara, then I would have continued working at Angelus Furniture with all my friends.
Wow. You'd be the manager of Angelus Furniture.
I would have been for about 4 years because they ended up closing Angelus Furniture.
Okay. So As you go to college, what are the leadership experiences that began to sort of formulate for you?
Well, I my mom used to say she in Spanish, and I know you're bilingual, so you'll appreciate that. She used to say, "Tus amigos son una bendición de Dios." Be careful who you associate with.
Oh, yeah.
Your friends are a blessing, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the characteristics of leadership is be careful who you keep company with, right? Make sure that they improve the person that you are and not encourage instincts that could be detrimental to you. I think you can tell a lot about a person by the company that they keep. So I learned that. In fact, one person that I was friends with in college and we have remained friends is currently right now 250 miles above the Earth in the International Space Station.
Oh, wow.
And so he's the first and only Puerto Rican American ever astronaut. And we met in college, and so I try to keep...
he went to Santa Barbara as well?
He went to UC Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
He was a geology major, and I remember telling him, what are you going to do with that? So he reminds me of that all the time. And he said, what did you do with your major? So, so I think working hard.
Yeah.
I think that there is a tremendous benefit from persistence, perseverance, and tenacity. And too often we try to create such a soft landing. And I'm not that old, but I believe firmly in hard lessons prevent you from making the same mistakes in the future. And so being persistent, having resolve, right? Bearing down. I believe it's a very working class, blue collar, first generation quality.
Yeah.
And the one thing I wish I could communicate to students that come from very adverse circumstances is that in some ways, higher education, a classroom, reading a book, writing 5 pages will never compare to the difficulty you have already overcome and mastered.
Right.
That in so many ways, the challenges of higher education pale in comparison to the challenges you have already demonstrated your ability to overcome. And so if you approach it in that respect, you can learn this mathematical formula, this algorithm. You can learn how to craft this sentence and how to develop this paragraph. Those are skills that can be taught and improved. But the personal resolve to overcome, those are personal competencies that take a long time to acquire. And poor folk, people that have come up the way you and I have, people that understand true adversity, they've cultivated that capacity over a lifetime. And I wish that I could communicate that with greater sort of efficiency and fluency to those who think that higher ed might not be for them.
Right. Yeah.
I'd like to say you've already proven your ability to be part of this community. And UHD is a community that I think resonates well with folks from that kind of background, because this is a campus of generally older students, a campus of hardworking students, a campus for whom indulgence is not an attitude.
Right.
Hard work, perseverance, resolve. People have heard me talk about this notion of grit.
Yep.
I think our students capture that. Okay, they haven't acquired it the easy way.
Yep.
And so I learned that as an undergraduate, and the value of sometimes that sort of temporary suffering that inculcates in you a resolve and a character that when it's time for you to exert yourself as a leader, you're able to.
Wow. When you think about, as you learned all this, you're at Santa Barbara, take us very quickly then, your next, did you go straight for your master's or your doctorate?
I did a master's, and then
where'd you do your master's?
At Cal State Los Angeles, and then I did my PhD at UCLA, and I was a teacher for a period of years, and I taught in the community college system, and I also taught as an adjunct at a few smaller schools around Whittier, California, and Pasadena, and then I was an assistant professor at Cal State Fullerton. And always in teacher education, curriculum instruction. I happen to have a very high opinion of teachers and the importance of schools, colleges of education.
Of course.
Every successful person that I've met, every person that's been in a position of leadership, when you ask them, almost without being able to finish the sentence, you say, "Did you ever have a teacher that really made a difference?" And they go, "Mr. Walker,"
Right.
or in my case, David Boyer.
Yeah.
Or right. So every
Mr. Jessup, Mr. Londy, right?
Mr.
So,
Jessup and Mr. Londy.
Yeah.
I don't know if the young Bob they saw then
Right.
what you would become, right?
Right.
But they saw something in
Right,
you.
exactly.
And and sometimes for some of us who in our home we really couldn't communicate what we were trying to do academically.
Right.
Right. For us, the validation of a Mr. Jessup was so important.
Mm-hmm.
I remember vividly, like it was yesterday. My father passed away a few years ago, but I was working on my dissertation.
Yep.
So I'm working on my dissertation, and my father comes in the room, and he tells me in Spanish. I'll translate for the audience. He says, "¿Qué estás haciendo? What are you doing?" Mm-hmm. I said, just like this. I go, "Apá, estoy trabajando." Mm-hmm. Okay, Dad, I'm working. Okay. So he looked at me just like this. He looked at me up and down. He goes, "Sentado?"
Sitting down?
He goes, "Un hombre no trabaja sentado." Mm-hmm. A man doesn't work sitting down. Mm-hmm. Right?
Old school, right? Yeah.
So then he took me somewhere, and I think we dug a hole or something, right? But in his mind, if you're sitting down, you can't possibly be doing work, right? So if I say, "Hey, Dad, let me talk to you about this statistical analysis, this ANOVA or this t-test that I'm running on this data." Right. So for us, these teachers and educators and in their own way, mentors were also part of our leadership development. Mm-hmm. I tell people, never underestimate the power of a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of leadership is to understand the amplification of your position, and how even a small phrase, a small comment of encouragement can mean so much to someone. And I subscribe to the notion of servant leadership, humility. Again, I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe in this sort of principle of impermanence. You're there just a short time. So do good work while you're there, and you have an opportunity to do that for that short period of time.
Let me ask you one question, then I want to go to the Twitterverse so that students can ask some questions. So you've been here 7 months as the president of the University of Houston downtown. One of the things we've talked a lot about in the class is from the Jim Collins book, getting the right people on the bus.
Right, and the wrong people off.
Right. So as you come in, brand new president, you inherit a staff. Leaders all the time, we inherit new staff, so we have to figure out what to do. How did you assess what you're doing? And obviously you're probably still in the process of doing some of that assessment.
Right, I think that's the case, and in terms of a university or college presidency, I am still very much at the beginning of mine here at UHD. Right. And even though 7 months might seem like a long time, when you have some in these roles that have 5, 7, 8-year, 10-year tenures, I think President Castillo was president here for about 18 years. Mm-hmm. You put that in context, 7 months is not a very long time. But here's one thing that an event like Harvey can reveal. Mm-hmm. An event like Harvey also reveals the character and leadership of your colleagues, right? Yeah. And their concern for their subordinates, and their willingness to go above and beyond, and their willingness to come in, and their willingness to leave their families to come check on people and the campus. And I can tell you that the reaction from the staff that I've had the privilege of inheriting has been extraordinary. Mm-hmm. I couldn't be more impressed, and the work that they did. But as important as the work that they individually did, the ferocity with which they defended the work of their subordinates. Mm-hmm. In many cases, they were much more concerned about the people that report to them than with themselves and their own welfare. And I believe that that's a quality of leadership. It speaks to their character, so I feel very comfortable about the current situation of the leadership at UHD.
I remember during Hurricane Ike, we brought the staff together. Very similar, but not exact, right? They're all different. But with Ike, everyone lost power, right? All over the city, everyone had lost power, but our building still worked. But I remember there was at least one of the senior staff who's like, no, listen, I don't want us to have to work. I need to go take care of my own stuff. And her stuff was no different than anyone else's. But all of us understood we were there to serve children. It's sort of interesting. You sort of see some people who sort of, the nails sticking out in a sense from the passion that everyone else has. So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I don't think I saw that during Harvey, and we had faculty taking in students who their apartment had been damaged. We had students who had lost quite a bit volunteering at George R. Brown. I mean, really, if there's something, I understand that there's a lot of negative news and negative stories about young people, but I tell you, the stories that I heard about our young people were remarkable and amazing. And I couldn't be more proud of the campus, our faculty, our staff, and our students, and their families, and the resolve that they've shown.
All right, you ready for the Twitterverse here?
I'll do my best.
You're a big tweeter, aren't you? Yeah, all right. So Jacob Cole wants to know, what are some leadership strategies you use when making an executive decision?
I think it's important to gather as much information as possible. I think it's important to listen to the people that gathered that information for you and allow them to filter some of it and say, well, here's what we meant, here's what's important, here's what you should pay attention to. I think it's important to calculate sort of, this course of action based on that information versus this course of action. I think it's important to calculate the consequences of this action versus this action. I think it's important to surround yourself with people that will give you frank and honest counsel, not people that will counsel you in the way that they think will placate your already premeditated decision.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's important for you to be prepared to take their advice and then make a decision.
How important, I've had different leaders that have talked about the importance of really sleeping on it. How important is that for you? Is that a big deal?
Well, I'm not sure that in every instance you need to have that much time, but we were talking earlier about Lincoln, President Lincoln, and he was referred to often as the great dawdler. And he commented in a number of occasions about the importance of just taking time to think through the decision. And some people were obviously sort of taken aback by his strategy, think you should be much more decisive, you should immediately, and he felt like sometimes he needed time, maybe the evening, maybe the week, to make a decision, and I believe that there's value in that. Some of these decisions are about things that you have no idea about. You're completely out of your depth. It might be some capital expenditure on some piece of machinery but you have no idea, but it's a lot of money, and you might have to be paying this for several years, and things are good now. What happens 3 years from now, and how would you adjust financials to accommodate this commitment from 3 years back? So sometimes taking time is in your best interest.
Yeah. Leslie Asalia wants to know, how important is hiring the right people, and what do you look for when adding people to your team?
Wow, that's such a great question, and congratulations for being thoughtful. I don't know that there are very many things more important than hiring the right people.
Yeah.
You hear little sayings like always hire somebody who's smarter and always hire somebody to complement your deficiencies, etc. I think those are two considerations. But over the course of my career, I think loyalty and honesty, and loyalty to the mission, not necessarily to you, the individual, but because then they'll tell you what's right instead of what you might want to hear, and somebody that has the integrity, the character, the bearing, the professionalism to be honest, regardless of how you take it. Those qualities are rare, and so you try to ask questions to try to expose whether they possess those kinds of characteristics. And they might tell you of an example of something that professionally was disadvantageous for them because they followed their conscience.
And that's also very revealing. So
you try to look for that when you ask that question.
Sometimes you ask that question. You ask that question about, did you ever get cross with or give advice that wasn't well received? And there's a difference between, do you want me to answer the question or do you want me to give you the answer you want to the question, right? So hiring the right people is absolutely invaluable, and the right people that share your values about how to do things.
It just makes you a better leader, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah. Marcellin Champion wants to know, leading a class is of course very different than leading an organization. But as you made the transition from class to leadership, what was the hardest lesson that you learned?
Well, that's a very good question, because in a classroom, when you're a professor, for example, you're trying to engage all parts of the classroom. You're trying to make eye contact and create some kind of personal rapport with all your students. But in these roles, there are so many people, and so often it's difficult to create a personal connection, a personal relationship, right, with each of your constituents, because they can be hundreds or thousands.
Right.
So sometimes it becomes challenging to really communicate a sort of an ethos of concern, because you don't have a personal sort of connection with the person. So, but I think some of the things from the classroom that do translate is asking a lot of questions, trying to get people engaged, trying to get them excited about the question and about the possible outcome, about your possible approach, being accessible. I think one of the things that you have to be is a little bit affable in the classroom. Students need to feel like they can talk to you and talk to you in the hallway or talk to you in the parking lot.
And that translates, doesn't it?
And I hope it translates. I was walking with my son just yesterday. I was showing him the campus. And
how old is your son?
Well, I have 3 boys. My oldest is 19, and he's home from college, so we have him for about a week. But he hasn't been home in about 5 months. And so I was showing him the campus and trying to explain to him the water levels from Harvey. And an older gentleman came up and he said, "I've seen your photographs. I haven't had the pleasure. I want to introduce myself. I'm here from the MBA." And we had a chat. And I introduced him to my son. I said, "This is my son. This is so and so." And he said, "Thank you for introducing your son to me." And so I think that kind of accessibility, affability, a lot of that is cultivated in the classroom. And I hope it continues to translate into my role in this position.
Yeah. Latrice wants to know, what drives you to keep going day to day, and who's your biggest inspiration?
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that good?
That's so good. You have some very talented students.
I know.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know if I'm going to phrase this as elegantly as I would like to, but let me put it this way. Education changed the course of my life and the course of my wife's life. And it created an opportunity for my children that I could never imagine growing up where I grew up. And so everything I am and everything I've become, I owe to education in this country. And so every day when I get up in the morning, I am driven by a sense of obligation to create the same circumstance and opportunities for others.
Yeah.
And I guess this is going to sound a bit cliche, but I don't want to get emotional, but I think the person that inspires me the most and that I look up to the most has always been my mother. And I say that because my mother was completely uneducated. She never went to school a day in her life. She didn't wear shoes until she was a teenager. And she was taught to read by an aunt, and she was taught to read using the Bible. But my whole life I saw my mother in charge. I saw my mother running things. I never saw her take a second sort of place to anybody, including my father. She was talented and insightful and decisive and ethical and strong, and I like to believe that in some small way I reflect the same character and principled behavior that she modeled for all of us. So.
Wow. There's a leadership idol for you, huh? Wow, that's fantastic. That's touching. So Stacy McKenzie wants to know, do you think it's a leader's responsibility to open doors and mentor like the doors that were opened for you by your teacher?
Yes.
Yeah, that's easy, isn't it?
That's easy, but the answer is yes, and the answer is we have to do it very, very deliberately. And if you don't mind, it's Stacy, right?
Yeah, that was Stacy.
Okay,
yeah.
and Stacy and others. I mean, I think you having some expectation of it, and saying to someone, were people helpful to you? And if they respond yes, to say, would you consider being helpful to me in some sort of way? I think those of us in this role, if we're not already doing it, that sort of query would prompt us to do it with even greater zeal.
Yeah. Michelle McClinton, she wants to know, when recruiting department or college leaders and faced with equally qualified candidates, how do you make the selection decision?
Well, that's a good question.
It is.
Generally, at least at a college level, a dean level, department chair, etc., a program coordinator, a director would generally fall to a dean, and the dean's appointment would generally fall to a provost. So I'm not trying to deflect the question.
Well, let's say it's a vice president.
Okay.
And someone who you hire.
All right, and
they're equally qualified.
Right. I think I look at a body of work. I think I look at what kind of institutions that they've been at, how many different institutions, their tenure at those institutions. I look at issues like what size budget have they managed, their FTEs, how many people have they supervised, any significant projects, any significant successes, or any visible or reportable sort of deficiencies or errors. I think if I were to hire somebody here at UHD, do they have experience in an urban setting? Do they have experience with, for UHD, first generation college students, diverse college students, economically disadvantaged college students? If it's a VP, the example that you gave, and they have no exposure whatsoever with transfer students, we have a sizable transfer student population. And so if you address this 36-year-old transfer student the way you would a 19-year-old first time in college student, right? So what kind of backgrounds and experiences do you have that are germane, and excuse the vernacular, that are germane to the contextual specificity of UHD?
Yeah, and it's interesting, you talk about equally qualified, but you have two people, there's always differences, aren't there?
These would be points of difference or points of distinction,
yeah,
right? They might seem on paper to be approximately similar, but this candidate has urban experience, transfer student experience, larger FTE, has maybe, this person has an EDD, this one has a PhD, there could be a difference that's valuable there. And they might, if you work in Texas and you have experience working in Texas, that's an asset. So it's how you craft the job description that really determines how you weight certain qualifications.
Afshan Malik wants to know, what advice would you have given yourself professionally and personally 10 years ago?
Oh my
goodness,
something? That's a brilliant question.
I'm gonna start asking that question.
I think I'm gonna ask that question, and I'm gonna cite him. What advice? I think I would have said, stop talking and listen to others more.
Oh.
Yeah, when you're young, you could be very opinionated. And it's okay to have an opinion, you just don't always have to articulate your opinion. Sometimes you have to be quiet enough to listen to other people's opinion. And so when I was younger, I was a little bit more eager, I was a little bit more impetuous, I was a little bit more bullheaded, but age has a way, there's a difference between, I believe that there's a difference between sort of intelligence and wisdom. I know a lot of people that are exposed to content and are very proficient in that content and not necessarily wise. Life, experience, humility.
And we know a lot of old people who aren't necessarily wise either, right? Age doesn't always give you that wisdom.
Age doesn't always, result in wisdom. So I believe the importance of wisdom. And so when you're young, it's more challenging to be wise. And so I think I've always had the right intention. Just how I executed it may not have always been the most wise. And so I think that's what I would say to my younger self. Be patient, listen a little bit more. It doesn't always have to be your way.
Yeah. Ashley Yarborough, she wants to know, is there a specific defining moment in your career that you want to share with us?
Well, I think two come to mind just without giving it a great deal of thought, Ashley, and I appreciate the question. The decision to come to Texas
turned out to be, in my case, and my wife. My wife is also a tenured professor. She's a professor at the University of Houston, and was a professor, a tenured professor at our previous institution. And coming to Texas was something that I could never have imagined how important it would have been for us personally and professionally. And so that was a real pivotal decision, and I did not appreciate at the time how transformational for our lives that would be, including having our third son in Texas. And I think I kind of feel that way about this job. I am so enamored and excited about UHD, and the students that we have here, and the mission of the university, and our responsibility to remain affordable, accessible, flexible, and relevant to our students and to this city and to this region. And it's those are goals that have always been important to me as an educator. And so to be in this role at this institution with that as our, and I say our, not in the royal our, meaning our, but really yours. I mean ours. Our collective responsibility is such a privilege. And if I were to do nothing else over the course of my career than what I'm doing today, I would consider it the privilege of my life.
Sure. Wow. So not from Texas, but you got here as quick as you could.
That's what they told me, and they said, this is what Ronald Phillips said. If you're here long enough to wear out a pair of boots, you won't ever leave.
I moved here from New York City, and I'm as Texan as they come now. So.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Tiffany Lane. This is an interesting question. How has social media impacted the way you communicate as a leader?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I think radically. I would say absolutely, categorically, in no uncertain terms, social media is something that...
do you use it a lot?
I use it in moderation, but I do. Now, prior to this role, I would have never used it. And I understand the importance of it. I understand it's how younger people, younger generation communicate, and I think it's a valuable method of communication. It's just one that I hadn't become proficient in, but I see the viewership. And I see how it proliferates and how one message can communicate so quickly to such a large audience. And that's very valuable to a university. Even during Harvey, we used social media, and students became some of the best communicators of what was happening on our campus to students that maybe their internet was down, or they couldn't recharge their phones in their home, etc. And so that how they connected with others to get information, I think was very valuable. There are also challenges with social media. I don't believe that I'm very proficient at it. I craft messages and I have others look at it, and then they pick photographs, and I mostly think every photograph of me is uncomplimentary, and so they give me.
Maybe there's something to that one.
I know there is. There is. I don't take a good picture, but they'll say, "Here are 3," and I go, "Each is equally objectionable to me." And they go, "Well, this one seems to be the least." So I think I'm becoming a little bit better at it. We absolutely have to do it. Presidents, chancellors, provost, deans have to use this important outlet, and I hope I'm becoming a little bit more proficient and capable at it. And but I've done so as a result of this position.
Okay, a couple of fun questions as we finish up today. You've been in Houston for about 7 months now. Right. Do you have a favorite restaurant?
Well, I tell you, given my growing waistline, it seems like I have about a dozen favorite restaurants. But I would say since I've been in Houston, the place that I've been wrecking the most is very close to where I live. It's a small Asian restaurant called the Rice Box on Rutland and 20th.
Yeah, it's good?
Oh. It's
you like it too much?
I like it too much. Yeah. Let's just say they put my photograph and my kids on the wall.
Oh wow. Yeah. That's a lot. You may need to shop around for some new restaurants.
Yeah. So it's actually named the Rice Box. There's a scene in Blade Runner, the original, where they're at a little street vendor.
Yes.
having noodles or something, and the camera pans and shows the name of that little booth. It says Rice Box.
Oh, wow.
And so this is named after, which I love that noir film with Harrison Ford.
Did you see the new
No,
one?
I have not.
Yeah, I haven't either. Your first job you ever had, your first paying job?
My first paying job, I had a summer job right after 8th grade. And it was a summer job that my sister helped me to get when I was 13. In Los Angeles, at the time, you could get a worker's permit at 13. And so I worked that summer. But the first job that I believed to be a job, I worked at a grocery store on, then it was called Brooklyn Avenue. And it was I worked in the meat area, and I would rotate the chicken breasts, and I would clean out the blood, and I would hook the sides of beef and boxes of chicken, and I actually got sick doing it, and I started anyways. I got sick doing it, but I kept working because I didn't know any better. And so that's the first job that I think of. Like,
what was the name of that supermarket? Do you
well,
remember?
I want to say it was called a Big Brothers Market, and there were a lot of us from our high school that worked there. But what would happen is you were in that freezer, and then you'd come outside. It was 80 degrees, 70 degrees, and so something happened to my lungs, but I didn't know any better, so I just kept working. So, but when I think of like hard labor that I didn't like, and I was paid for, but I do know, I do remember this: the first paycheck I ever got, I gave to my mother.
Nice, very nice. Well, she was your mentor, right? In a sense, she was right
I don't know
there.
if I was told that. I don't know if my brothers or my dad told you better give the first check. But I remember thinking, because I did it like, a little.
Here's the money, Mom. When they make the Juan Muñoz movie, who's gonna play you? Who do you want to play you?
I hope it's not Danny DeVito. But you know who people say I resemble quite a bit? Calipari, the basketball coach.
Oh, John Calipari, yeah.
I get that.
Well, he has a slick hair.
I get that every once in a while. I've actually been stopped at an airport, asked. So he's not an actor. Man, I'll tell you. If you ask me. Well, he's not a young man anymore. I like Benjamin Bratt.
Oh yeah,
I like Benjamin Bratt, but he's not a very, very young man. So
he's a Cubano.
That's right.
Benjamin Bratt,
So most of the guys that I admire, the actors, are a little bit long in the tooth.
Yeah.
So maybe that kid Mario Lopez.
There you go. Well, he
kind of,
and he's pretty on camera. So good. President Juan Muñoz, thank you so much for joining us here in the Leadership Studio.
Well, I appreciate it, and I tell you, this topic of leadership and particularly cultivating it in the nonprofit sector, and I've served on many nonprofit boards, it is so timely and so invaluable. What we need is leadership on these nonprofit boards, where often we have good intentions that doesn't translate into good policy.
That's right. Yeah. Are you in any boards right now?
I am not, but I am actually considering a few. I am on the Central Houston board, but not on any nonprofits. But I have been both in California and Texas, dozens.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Hey, that's it for the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Thank you guys so much for being here. We'll see you next time. Keep up the good work.